was the hectic scene on Ross Street in Mobile shortly before 6 o'clock Sunday. Now, we've learned the details on what drew such a large police presence. According to Mobile police, a domestic altercation happened at a home near the 1200 block, and shots were fired.
I don't know what happened for real. I know we heard a gunshot. My people called the police. We chilling out there barbecuing. I think I heard about two of them boys, though, about a 2P.
Thought it was firework, but it's too early for 4th of July, so.
Investigators tell us 25-year-old Brandon McDuffie shot and killed his mother, Tracy McDuffie. They say his brother tried to intervene, and Brandon fired at him too. That brother fired back and shot and killed.
Before that, News 5 learned that 2 people were killed in the shooting on Ross Street in Mobile. But what the news didn't tell you in that first report? The 2 dead were mother and son. The killer? Also dead, because his own brother had to gun him down. Brandon McDuffie had just pumped 10 bullets into his mother, Tracy. Then he turned the gun on his brother, Brent. That's when everything changed. That's when a witness became a killer. That's when one son's murder spree forced another son to choose: watch his mother's killer walk away or end his own brother's life. Mobile police called it a domestic incident. The neighbors called it unthinkable. But for the McDuffie family, it was the end of everything. Before we continue, if real-life family crime grips you, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and smash subscribe with the bell so you never miss a new case on Fatal Family Network. Tracy Laverne McDuffie was 52 years old. Born and raised in Mobile, Alabama, she wasn't looking for fame or fortune. She studied at Coastal Alabama Community College and found her calling in healthcare. Those who knew her described Tracy as someone who lived life on the low. No drama, no conflicts, just a mother trying to raise her 2 boys in a city where the crime rate runs higher than the national average. Mobile, Alabama? Is this city dangerous? The statistics say yes. Both violent and property crimes exceed the U.S. average here. It's a place where neighbors shake their heads at the daily violence, where "put the guns down" has become a desperate plea that falls on deaf ears. But Tracy? She kept her family close, stayed out of trouble, focused on her work in the health sector that she loved. She had 2 sons, Brent Trayvon McDuffie, her firstborn, her protector. On social media, Tracy's love for him was clear. December 13th, she'd posted, "23 years ago today, my early Christmas gift weighed 4 pounds 5.5 ounces. Happy birthday to my firstborn, Brent Trayvon McDuffie. I love you so much, son." Then there was Brandon, her second son. She loved him too, treated them both with the same care, the same hope that every mother has, that her children would outlive her, that they'd make something of themselves, that they'd take care of each other when she was gone. But that's not how this story goes. June 8th, 2025, a Sunday that started like any other in the 1200 block of Ross Street. Inside the McDuffie home, an argument was building. Mother and son, Tracy and Brandon, caught in a dispute that was about to cross a line no family should ever cross. We don't know what started it. Maybe it was money. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was one of those fights that builds from nothing into everything. What we do know is that Brandon McDuffie had a gun. And in that moment of rage, in that split second where anger overrides love, where fury destroys family, he made a choice that would end 3 lives. The argument escalated, voices raised, and then Brandon pulled out his weapon. 10 shots. That's how many times Brandon McDuffie pulled the trigger, pointing the gun at the woman who gave him life. 10 bullets tearing through his mother's body. The neighbors heard it, the sound cutting through their Sunday afternoon like a nightmare made real. Tracy McDuffie didn't stand a chance. Each shot was deliberate. By the time the 10th bullet found its mark, Tracy was gone, dead in her own home, killed by the child she'd raised, loved, protected. But Brandon wasn't done. There was a witness. His brother Brent had seen everything. And in Brandon's mind, twisted by whatever rage had driven him to matricide, there could be no witnesses, not even family, especially not family. He turned the gun on Brent, his own brother, the same boy who'd grown up beside him, who'd shared the same mother's love, who'd eaten at the same table, lived under the same roof. Brandon was ready to make it a double murder, ready to wipe out his entire family line in one afternoon of madness. But Brent had something Brandon didn't count on. Call it survival instinct, call it training, call it the desperate need to live when death is staring you down. Brent was armed too, and when Brandon turned that gun on him, when his brother became his would-be executioner, Brent faced an impossible choice. Let Brandon kill him, or kill Brandon first. In those seconds, Brent McDuffie did the unthinkable. He shot back. He pulled the trigger on his own brother, the brother who just murdered their mother, the brother who was about to murder him. Brandon McDuffie dropped. 2 bodies. One survivor who would have to live with what he'd done, what he'd had to do, for the rest of his life. The response was immediate. Mobile Police Department officers flooded Ross Street, transforming a quiet neighborhood into an active crime scene. Yellow tape went up fast, blocking off Albert Street, Ross Street, creating a perimeter around the house where 2 members of the McDuffie family lay dead. Chief William Jackson arrived on scene himself. In all his years with Mobile PD, he'd seen plenty of domestic violence cases. But a son killing his mother with 10 shots, then dying at the hands of his own brother? This was different. This was the kind of case that stays with you. Officers discovered evidence quickly, and the weapons that had torn a family apart were now just items in evidence bags. But the story they told was clear. Brandon's gun, emptied into his mother. Brent's gun, used in the most desperate act of self-defense imaginable. The neighbors came forward. They'd been outside enjoying their Sunday, barbecuing, living normal lives while inside that house, a family was destroying itself. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Tracy McDuffie's co-workers started showing up, confused and desperate. She was supposed to be at work. They'd been calling, checking on her. Now they stood behind the police tape with everyone else, trying to process what had happened to their colleague, their friend. The investigation itself was straightforward in the worst way. No mystery here. No unknown suspect to track down. Just a house full of evidence, 2 bodies that told their own story, and 1 survivor whose account would need to be verified but was supported by every piece of physical evidence on scene. The ballistics would confirm what everyone already knew. This was exactly what it looked like. A family argument that became a murder, that became a justified homicide. There would be no arrest for Brandon McDuffie. He was beyond the reach of justice, laid out on the same floor where he'd murdered his mother. But Brent? His situation was more complicated. He'd killed someone. Yes, it was his brother. Yes, that brother had just murdered their mother and was about to murder him. But he'd still taken a life. Mobile police made their position clear. The death of Brandon McDuffie would be presented to a grand jury. Standard procedure when someone kills another person, even in the clearest case of self-defense. Brent had survived the worst day of his life, but now he'd have to relive it in front of a grand jury, explaining why he'd had no choice but to shoot his brother. The legal system would have to decide, was this justifiable homicide? Every piece of evidence pointed to yes. Brandon had murdered Tracy. Brandon had turned the gun on Brent. Brent had acted to save his own life. But the law required its process, required Brent to wait and wonder if he'd face charges for surviving. The community watched and waited. This wasn't just another mobile crime story. This was a tragedy that touched something deeper. A son forced to kill his brother who'd just killed their mother. Legal experts weighing in suggested the grand jury would likely return no indictment. How could they? What else was Brent supposed to do? Let Brandon kill him too? Leave no witnesses to their mother's murder? Chief Jackson called it senseless violence. He stood in front of news cameras and made his plea again. The same plea he'd been making for years. Put the guns down, learn conflict resolution, walk away, live to see tomorrow, call the police to solve your problems.
We continue to preach, please have conflict resolution skills, learn to walk away, live to see tomorrow. Call us to solve your problems if you can't solve them. But oftentimes things like this, such as this, happen inside the home, and it's not preventable, unfortunately.
But then he said something that cut to the heart of it. Sometimes things like this happen inside the home. Sometimes they're not preventable. Because how do you prevent a son from snapping and murdering his mother? How do you prepare a family for one brother having to kill another? There's no neighborhood watch program for that. No community intervention that stops a family from imploding in the space of minutes. For the residents of Ross Street, of Mobile, this case became a dark reminder. Every family has arguments. Every family has conflicts. But in most families, those arguments end with slammed doors or silent treatments. Not with two family members dead and one survivor carrying guilt that no amount of legal justification can erase. Tracy McDuffie went to work helping people in the healthcare sector. She raised 2 sons. She posted birthday messages full of love. She lived quietly, stayed out of trouble. She deserved to grow old, to see grandchildren maybe, to retire and enjoy the life she'd built. Instead, she died at the hands of someone she'd given everything to protect and raise. Brandon McDuffie made a choice that destroyed everything. Whatever drove him to point that gun at his mother and pull the trigger 10 times, rage, mental illness, drugs, we may never know. It cost him his life and destroyed his family. He became both murderer and victim in the span of minutes. And Brent McDuffie? He survived, but at what cost? He'd watched his mother die. He'd been forced to kill his brother. He'd gone from son and sibling to orphan and survivor in one afternoon. The grand jury might clear him legally, but who clears the conscience of a man forced to kill his own blood? The McDuffie family tragedy remains. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous place isn't the streets. Sometimes it's inside your own home. Sometimes the person most likely to hurt you shares your last name, your history, your blood. This is what domestic violence looks like at its absolute worst. Not just bruises that heal or words that fade, but families erased, futures stolen, and survivors left to wonder how love turned to bullets. How a Sunday argument became the end of everything they knew. The case of Tracy and Brandon McDuffie stands as one of Mobile's most heartbreaking domestic tragedies. 2 lives lost, 1 life forever changed, a family that can never be whole again, and a community left asking the question that has no good answer. How does a son murder his mother? How does a brother kill a brother? How does a family destroy itself from within? We may never understand what broke inside Brandon McDuffie that day, but we know the cost. We count it in bodies, in tears, in a survivor who did what he had to do and will live with it forever. Family should be a refuge, but even the closest ties can fracture. Stay alert, look out for one another, and reach out if you sense danger. See you in the next story here on Fatal Family Network. Thanks for watching.